history and origins, and how she got started, and eventually trained as a professional upholsterer.
Well, I was trying to think about what to talk about other than just actually physically sitting up here and upholstering a chair, which would be really boring. And I was thinking about, like, when I was first interested in upholstery, like what drew me to it. And it, you know, upholstery as in the textile or the fabric is like one of those, or an upholstered piece that you sit on is like air or gravity. It's one of those things that's around us all the time that we don't really give much thought to at all. You just sit on it, and you don't, or even like your skin. You know that your body works and it's whatever, it feels good, but you have no idea what's going on underneath it. So a long time ago, I took this chair that I got out of a dumpster that I love and wore it out. It was probably from like 1920, and it was definitely in need. It got moths. I gave it moths. It didn't come with moths, and so it started just totally disintegrating. I was like, what should I do with that? And so I kind of just started taking it apart and like all these levels and things, and I didn't understand them at all. I didn't have a mindset where I was like, okay, A equals B equals C. And it took a while, but I ended up going to a trade school and learning professionally. But you know, in researching the history of the upholstery trade, it's kind of got this sort of dark history that I don't think people know about or think about. But it started out as a funeral, almost like a designer would be for funerals in the like 12th century, 13th century. People would, like, I'm sure they were rich, although it's not really defined that way, but the upholder was the original word for it, not upholsterer, but upholder, which is like a Middle English word, would come in and do all the trimmings and all the, I don't know what that means because there's no images of it, but I'm sure there's probably a casket with like things draped over it. And then that person, or that trade evolved into being what we know now is like a designer that you would hire to come into your house and do all the soft furnishings. So it would be drapery and bedding and, you know, things you sit on, all that kind of stuff. And then now, today, it's specifically usually just things you sit on. But today, the trade is also kind of dark and weird, and, you know, there's a few things at work there. And one of them is that in this country, there's not much manufacturing going on, so being taught the trade, it's hard to just go out and say, I want to become an upholsterer and find a trade school. And I found that trade school, but I was the last student at it in Portland. And there's one other person with me, another woman, but it basically is now totally defunct. But the way people typically get trained in the U.S. here now is through prisons, and for work that's done here. So
break the law to start the trade.
There's a really good way to go rob a 7-Eleven and you can totally get free education. But yeah, so literally, like now that I've owned a couple different businesses, and we've been really small scale on purpose because we're really hands-on. We're not necessarily money driven, although that would be great sometime in the future to earn a living at it. But the people that come and apply for jobs are just, you can kind of tell that they've been, even the other upholstery shops that you talk to, it's hard to keep people regularly. There's a lot of drug issues, and they literally are trained in prison. Just the way it is. But you know, in the two shops that I've had it's really strange. And even in my at the trade school that I went to, probably the last 10 students were women, totally unrelated to each other, and that was probably 12 years ago. And everybody was in their late 20s, early 30s, and artistic, and just like, okay, I want to learn this thing. And they came from just totally different backgrounds. But and then the people that have come to me wanting to learn it as a shop owner have been women. I don't think I've talked to one. No offense to you men, but really don't think I've talked to one mail about how to learn it, and it's one of those things that there's no easy answer for how to get into it as a trade other than robbing a bank. I went to trade school. It was Portland Upholstery School that was out on Sandy. It was 70-something in Sandy, 76th and Sandy, and that person that started that trade school was an ex-con who I was rumored to have committed murder, and obviously done well with his life. I don't know. But he was not involved with the school when I took over. There was someone that was more my age that had taken it over who had been a student also. And I went there for a year and learned what I thought was everything. I just thought, like, I'm going to go open my own business, and I just know everything, and I just knew about 1/10 of what it actually meant to do it professionally. And but I worked in kind of a, can I get a tissue? I have a little cold. I worked in a bubble. I worked on my own after I got out of trade school. I was there for a year. Worked in my basement for a couple years, and that was dingy and gross and moldy. And I'm like, oh, okay, I kind of open a storefront and just take whatever comes my way. And it's a really, I learned so much so quick because I knew nothing. I didn't know that things were made in factories that would come into my shop, and I'd be like, okay, I can do it. Yeah, I can do that. And in order to make any money at it, you have to be able to do it quickly. Like, you can learn anything over time, but if you have 2 days to do something to make a living at it, it was just, I've learned a lot, and now I know to be like, I can't do that, and I can't do that, and I can't do that. There's no way that can be done in any kind of town. I don't have that machine, I don't have this tool, nobody has this tool in town, and so I've kind of just learned a lot of problem solving skills. But working alone has just been kind of nuts, because I'm kind of like somebody that's in a time warp. Like, I just learned these things on my own, and in my current shop I have a partner and coworkers, and we're like, oh, I kind of like try to act like I'm not like looking at something they're doing 10 times easier than the weird way that I do it. But so anyway, the one way that I was kind of trying to think about, like, an actual upholstery piece, and this piece not included, but generally when you see a big old comfy chair, we do all kinds of stuff. We don't. This is my chair. I've had this chair for 4 years, and it's been needing the repair that I'm going to show you tonight forever. But it's the cobbler's children thing. Excluding this piece, I usually get pieces that I don't love. Like, I just do kind of whatever comes my way, and there are these big overstepped pieces, and when you've lost your remote or something, and you dig in there, and you're like, oh, you can kind of just feel it. It's like you're afraid your hand's going to get bit or whatever. You're like reaching in. I know what's in. I know what you're feeling. It's disgusting. It really is gross.
What's the best thing you've ever found?
Well, I'll get to that in just a second. I got the best, the worst, and the weirdest, so kind of defined that way. But I get asked that question a lot, and how much money have you found is another question, so I'll get that story too. But I think of like those pieces kind of as time capsules, and because they really are. Things come in and they don't come out. There's no way for them to get back out. Just the principles of how they're in there, they just don't come back out. And mostly it's Cheerios and rubber bands and really uninteresting Cheetos and popcorn and just stuff that you like pull the last thing out and it just goes bleh on the floor. And there's a lot of money in there, like loose change. And when I first started, I was like, oh, those are quarters in there, and I'm going to clean the quarters. And now I'm just like, poor or not poor, I just cannot deal with another rubber band stuck to a quarter with a kernel of popcorn on it. There's a lot of that. But but like the older pieces, like the things that you find from like the 20s or whatever. I mean, I've done Victorian, whatever. There generally is something in there that kind of acts as like a time thing. It could be a coin or lots of hairpins that are those kind that actually don't really do anything, that are U-shaped, that are like, lots of those, and little news articles and stuff. But so I have found some strange things, and the first one I found, which is the saddest thing I ever found, but it was funny, and I remember I first told you that, and our dad, we almost peed our pants, but it's not funny at all. It's really just kind of sad. But it was this little card that was like what you'd find in like a board game from the 50s, because there's tons of kids' toys from the 50s and that stuff, just tons of stuff. This little board game that said, I don't know what the game was, but it's just the little card that said, name something that you beat other than a rug. And you'd think an egg, or you'd think like an opponent, and then this like children's scratch that said a child. Oh. It's not funny at all. It's really just so sad, but so it's like, you know, and I was actually crying, and then I laughed, but I was crying initially. It's just so weird. But, so that's the worst thing I've ever found. And then the grossest thing I've ever found, I don't know if I categorize it as funny, but the grossest thing I ever found was, and there's been a few of them, but people find stuff free on the street, which is great, and I even like recommend that you do it, and I've done it. It's like, great, when this is free, don't be shy. So I can't really like fault them, and have taken their deposit, and you know, I need the money or whatever. I mean, I've got the piece. But the grossest thing was like, it was essentially like a kind of a 40s or 50s chair, and there's like, you know, underneath where the fabric would roll around would be flat here. And in theory, it should be flat there, but it was kind of bowed when I was looking down at it. And it was somebody's booger collection that they had like, for 50 years just done that. And I didn't notice it when the person dropped it off, and I was just like, it was just almost more than I could take, but not quite, because I actually did the job, and I didn't tell her. I was just like, because I knew she found it for free, and it was this great piece. That was gross.
That's what
No.
of our chair growing up.
No, it's not common. No, that is not common. I have never seen two of that, but I'm not talking, I mean, the random thing is common. I mean, honestly, that is common, like just randomness, but not the collection where somebody just routinely did this one thing over and over again. So I just let that one go and whatever, I got used to it. But the funniest thing that I found in a chair was, she's an actress, and I won't tell you who, but you would be able to rent a video. And then she's an acquaintance of mine. She brought it in. She had somebody, another friend of ours, bring it in, and okay, I'm redoing this piece, and took it apart, and there was a riding crop fell out. I didn't know that she was an equestrian. I don't think she has a horse background of any kind, and a little thing, a personal thing of lubricant. And I thought it was super, super funny, and I was like, well, but do you give it back? What do? You just keep it to yourself? And so I gave it back. And I was like, but I gave it back through the friend. I didn't actually have to see her. I was like, and make sure that no name gets her riding crop and lubricant back. So she got it back. Apparently I did a good job, and whatever. So that's, that's kind of the more fun side of what I do, and gross side. But Portland has a unique history in furniture manufacturing, or did. They don't anymore at all. I guess myself excluded from that, because I do design furniture and build furniture from scratch. But I still mostly just reupholster furniture. And I have, my business now is more focused on, instead of the more conventional upholstery supplies that they would use for the battings and stuff. My first shop was Sit-On at Custom Upholstery, and I kind of just did whatever came my way, and that was petroleum-based foams and Dacron, polyester batting, whatever, fabrics coming in from, I didn't know what they were, I didn't know where their wear ratings were, I didn't know what they were treated with. And then my shop now, I have a partner, her name's Ann Thompson. She and I have a business where we use, exclusively use things that kind of have been around forever to put back into our furniture. So like this is organic cotton. It looks the same as just conventionally produced cotton, but it's organic. It takes a weird round trip from, oh no, that's the wool. So the wool, which I don't have right here, but the Oregon grown wool takes a weird round trip to Texas to be cleaned and comes back. So somebody in Texas should just start producing wool so that it can take a one-way trip here to Portland, and then it would be more eco-friendly, but there are no cleaning for that. And this is a recycled polyester batting. And these both come, and I don't have a wool here, but there's a company that's, a new company that's opened up called Natural Felt here. And she does the Oregon wool, organic batten, and this is recycled polyester. And she bought this gigantic, crazy machine from this defunct batting place in Washington. I think it was Blaine. Is there a Blaine, Washington? But it takes up up to the ceiling, and it's this turn-of-the-century machine that's still just producing, and there's like one person that knows how to disassemble it and put it back together. So that's happening here in Oregon, and there aren't that many producers of batting in the United States at all. And it's happening here, so that's exciting. And it's like 2 blocks from my shop, which is great. So it's better than having it be from Mexico. This is my favorite chair in the entire world. Not only as this chair that I own, but this type of chair, I just absolutely love, and I've upholstered 20 of them or something. And they're made, they were probably designed by somebody that's notable, but I don't know who. They typically are made in Scandinavia, and this one is made by West Nofa, and it's Norwegian. And out of all the ones that I've done that are this just simple style, this hands down is designed so well. And I'll show you a little bit about what goes on, inside. It's a recliner. Well, is it a recliner? It tips back, but this part and this part are fixed and actually have a wood frame, and I'm going to remove this from it. And this piece sits here, but it also tips up this way, so that you can get this real ergonomic where your knees go down. And then there would have been this weird little bolster thing that was not upholstered to it with lead weights in the back that would come over. And this is the original upholstery too. It's in mint condition other than what I'm going to show you, which is really gross. But so the piece got lost. But we have had this in our home for like 3 or 4 years with my dog, and I'm pulling the dog hair off of it. It's comfortable except the seat. And this is West Nofa, but there's Dux is a more popular brand that makes this kind of thing. And this wood is really unique too, because this is rosewood. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's just really beautiful. And so what I have wanted to do, and it's the cobbler's children have no shoes, is remove this and keep this, because this wool is actually, it has no sun damage. Like when you separate it from itself, you can, in the parts that it hasn't faded, there's just nothing wrong with it. So it's just, every part of this is a natural fiber. And the seat was made out of natural latex rather than a petroleum-based foam, and it has started to completely disintegrate because it's probably a 50-year-old piece. This is just made out of cotton and springs, and it's, I can't really get into the innards, but the way that it's made, it's actually just kind of the reverse of what your spine would be. And the backs are always made the same, they're always 100% intact, and the seats are absolutely always shot because they're 100% natural latex that's just going down the drain. So this is what the latex should look like, white. I stripped this today, and this is what, this is a pint of just, you know, when your stuff starts to just leak that yellow stuff, the powder. There were at least two of these pints. I just saved one pint because I figured but I kind of have this piece set up that the fabric just kind of just barely tacked on, so I was going to show you what the foam actually looked like. But it was relatively easy to find these pieces. These pieces are, this is probably a $300 chair in this condition, and they're just the best things ever. And lots of different brands that make them. There's even like a Lane, which is an American brand, it's kind of a knockoff of these. But Portland had a few different. There was like Built Well, Built Right. I have a couch by Tempo. That's just Rose City. They had a big manufacturer, furniture history. And I'm sure that the upholstery school that I went to that's now defunct was probably employing, that's where they were drawing their employees from as well as prisons. But, there's just no manufacturing going on. So I was pleased that I was able to go to that school, but really sad that it was the last of that. So I was going to take this piece away from its base and kind of just shove some of this stuff over and then just show you guys how it's put together. And then I have a couple other of my favorite tools to show you. No, just the wood parts. So this piece is like so much more comfortable than a standard like recliner that you see at like the beach house that's falling apart with the cooler in the middle or whatever. There's just, I've done tons of those, but they literally, are like taking the typewriter apart. But I don't know if you guys will be able to see it, but this piece rocks. So it rocks back and forth, and this piece rocks. But it also will recline and stay fixed. But the only thing, the rocking mechanism is just this, I think this is, would you say this is steel, aluminum? This, and then the frame is beveled down, so this is the only thing that makes it rock. And then this really simple mechanism, and this piece takes 2 screws to get it away, and then that's a wood frame, which is typically what you see in upholstered furniture. Recliners typically are like 7,000 screws, all of different head types and sizes, and you have to label everything, and there's so many moving parts, and I've never sat in a chair that's more comfortable than this and more simply designed than this. So this is my favorite. But I have this piece kind of, I was joking saying this is like the Chippendales chair because I'm about to do the tearaway. I have it kind of ready to sort of take off. Yeah, that's gross. Can you take that down? If it spills, it'll be really gross. So, also, these springs and this stuff is all just absolutely pristine, which it just is just great. So, and these are the 2 screws that hold it together. And so, time-lapse photography here. There's some of the disgustingness. That's my least favorite thing is to deal with that yellow dust.
If you took out all the stuff before you came here.
Well, that's the pint that you see over there.
No, the fabric where you took out all the nails.
Oh, yeah. And I vacuumed a ton. I mean, there was probably 3 pints of that stuff. But so I just wanted to give you an idea of what we were living with for. So that's where the 3 pints came from. Is this just crocodile thing that's about to fall apart? But it's really amazing because it's actually just turning back to what's natural substance. And if this had been made of a petroleum-based foam, it would be flat and useless. But it wouldn't. Did you have a question? Feel free to ask.
I was going to let you finish your.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
So, what is the natural foam made out of?
It's the sap from a rubber tree.
Okay.
Yeah. So, it's really just any exposure to light. Like if we put the white thing over there, if that gets exposed to light within a week, it starts to break down. It's just great. But the petroleum-based thing would have been useless, flat, but wouldn't have gone anywhere for I don't know how long. I mean, it would wind up in a landfill somewhere. And I've tried and tried to find places to recycle that stuff, and there's just nowhere to do it. I have had sources, but this is gross. So I'm going to, at some point, very soon, put the seat back on. And actually, this is really interesting. This is petroleum-based foam. And this is latex on top. I didn't even, usually they're only just the one thing. So you can see the difference. This is essentially just as much garbage as this, but this isn't going anywhere. So I would leave I may put a new piece of burlap on here and then just put probably a 2-inch piece of 100% natural latex on top of that. So, yeah.
What does replacing the burlap help?
Yeah, that's clean.
Well, you see the shape. You don't necessarily want to have it. I probably should pull that off. These divots, you don't necessarily want that because it's going to compromise. Your cushioning is going to actually go down in there and stop doing what. So the burlaps, the strength of that kind of levels out what the springs are doing. Kind of just makes it flat. So that this is what you're feeling. You kind of don't even want to know this is here. When you sit on any couch, it's the same thing. People don't know what's in there because you're not supposed to. You're supposed to just feel comfortable. And people don't know why they feel like, this is uncomfortable or this is comfortable. They have no idea why. I know why. things get
Booger
pitched
collection.
weird. Yeah, booger collection. No, actually, that guy was probably really comfortable. He was just like, yeah, I'm comfortable. No, it's usually when your body gets pushed forward. It's ergonomics make things uncomfortable. It's you sink down. Like old people will be like, my couch is comfortable. No, it's not. And I'm sinking down into it. I have to crawl out of it. And it's like, well, all their springs, when they're 8-way hand-tied springs and they stop supporting you up here. When the ties break, you go down here. And I actually brought some, this is jute webbing that's still made in Italy. And it has lanolin because you actually are literally tying it. And you have to have calluses and all that kind of stuff to do the ties. So that's where we get our jute webbing for the 8-way coil hand tie. Did you have a question?
No,
Oh, sorry. So this piece very soon will just be my Edith Bunker chair. We've been avoiding it for a while, and my dog kind of even avoids it because it literally, like when I sweep, I have to you can imagine the kind of stuff. You can just put it on the ground anywhere.
What's the cost difference between a latex cushion and a?
Not that much now. If you get like a really high-end petroleum-based foam that's got a 20-year life, it's comparable to latex. It's maybe like 20% more for 100% natural latex. There's other latexes that are on the market that aren't 100%, but they're almost as much, so why go to the trouble they're like 20% latex, 80% petroleum. But 100% natural latex and a HR foam, a peach foam, are kind of comparable. Since Katrina hit, they use that as an excuse to up the oil prices. But I mean, oil prices are what they are because there's no more oil. So might as well wrap our brain around that. But you can always get cheaper. You can always get less expensive foam that will last 5 or 10 years. That would be half as much as latex. I am not aiming to be just a high-end shop, but that's kind of what I've become because I've chosen the materials that I've chosen. So I don't compare it to. I just use those things, and in the last 3 years since I've gone that direction, we're just doing what we're doing, and so I do know that it compares with a really good petroleum-based foam, cost-wise, and that didn't used to be the case. It used to be like twice as much, and oil has gone up.
Okay, so it's here in the oil.
Yeah, it really has. So,
And all of the latex foam, is that produced overseas, or do they get the latex, bring it over, and then produce the foam?
the trees aren't here,
Right.
and and generally it's all coming from overseas.
Malaysia and in Malaysia.
Yeah, I think Malaysia. We don't. India? Woo, I'm sorry. I don't know. It's definitely not produced here. But you could essentially, as far as you could eat it. The chemicals that are in here are food grade. I mean, you could literally eat it. They're 1% chemical and 99%. And it's made into this foam product with steam rather than a chemical reaction, and so the steam's clean and it's renewable. The trees aren't killed to make it.
It's healthier than me eating at Taco Bell.
What's that?
I said it's healthier than eating at Taco Bell.
It might be. And then I have all this disgusting, gross stuff on my table, which I hate. Can I just put it on the floor?
Where usually you get all your materials, like when you shop for the foam or for the textile, you go online, you have a special place there?
There's so many places to get, like there's kind of two categories, and one would be the textiles, and then the other would be like the inside. So there's the outsides and the insides, and there's definitely not one source. There's some places that carry more, like some really old school places that carry stuff like the tools. You know, Osborne is a big upholstery manufacturer, CS Osborne. And that's found locally, but they're not produced. I'm pretty sure they're made in the United States. But the soft stuff you go through a lot of would be like the organic cotton that I was talking about, and the wool and the recycled polyester. That's sourced locally. But we don't just source that. There's other companies that we get that from, and it's price dependent and quality dependent. So if the quality lapses in some things, sometimes people produce a great bag of wool, and then the next week they don't, and it's just, or somebody's price goes up and the other one doesn't. So it's online and a lot of word of mouth. But the textiles are from all over. I mean, there's no one way. We're mostly probably on the internet, that stuff. But it may not be as widely available to just a consumer. We have a showroom that houses, I think, probably the biggest selection of eco-friendly fabrics. I can't say for sure, but I'm sure in the U.S., and I don't know about the world. But because we have, a lot of places would say, this is our sofa, and you have 3 options. Well, we have thousands of options that fall into different categories, but they all have some kind of environmental story to them. And they're sourced from all over. I mean, we probably have 20 different vendors.
It seems like in a lot of these mid-century designs, they're this sort of rounded edge cushions and shapes, but you get the foam square. And maybe when they were made, they made thousands, and so they had some sort of mold. But how do you get round shapes out of that foam?
Well, this is a sample that, it does come, and we have a saw. And part of, I don't know if you were here when I first started speaking, but part of the thing where I was supposed to replicate something that looks like this, it can't be done because that's poured into a mold at a factory. But I looked at it like, oh my God, I'm supposed to be able to know this as an expert which I wasn't, a year out of upholstery school. But those are poured in molds with the real rounded edges. But it's a little bit deceptive that you think that it doesn't have, that it's rounded, because it's actually like the back has no latex in it, and that's just cotton that's been molded. The frame has way more to do with the shape than what the foam might be. We also can bevel an edge with our foam cutter to make it round, and we also usually nothing gets put in. This was just put there with no batting over it, but typically we put a layer of some kind of batting to kind of put just a barrier between the whatever the textile is and the foam. But when things are crazy shaped, I see them coming a mile away. We don't do it. There are people that will sculpt and with the turkey cutter, or whatever it is, get really creative, and I'm not.
Can you kind of cut away at the bottom edge and roll it over and sort of glue the cutaway part to the next layer down? Yeah,
like when we're putting, if I were to do something like this where you wanted to see it be really rounded, so I'd cut away the underside, the underside, and then wrap it around, and you could even staple that or glue that to make that rounded. You cut away the underside and then use the top edge, and you glue this flat side, and then that flat side goes down right to the side, to make it flat so that you're getting that round edge. But that's pretty simplistic. There's some things that are just so complex as far as the molds and pours. That's pretty typical and pretty easy and every day with dining seats that we do. But yeah.
Don't you have to account for the weight of the fabric as well, like what you're using?
As well, we do with our customers because we're custom, and we ask them, do they have 2-year-olds or Great Danes, or is it a little old lady? And there's wear ratings. Everybody that sells textiles does a wear rating. There's some standardized testing for that. There's a Wiesenbeck, and there's a Wiesenbeck, and what's the other one? They're 2 goofy names, but they do all those testings. We can't possibly know. You couldn't possibly know, like if you went to the, I won't name a name, but if you went to a fabric store locally that sold upholstery fabric, and you looked at 2 fabrics, one might have a rating of 10,000, which is really low, and another might have one of 100,000, and there's absolutely no way to know unless that test's done. And so, there's a lot of people are able to save a lot of money by going to places and paying $10 a yard, and that's great. Budget is everything, I get it. But, in 2 weeks, the dog could chew through the fabric, and if they don't know what the wear rating is, buyer beware.
But as an upholsterer, aren't there certain fabrics? I mean, there just have to be certain fabrics that are just a pain in the neck to deal with.
Oh yeah.
In terms of the weight of them.
Well, it's not necessarily the weight, it's usually the weave. Like if there's a super loose weave, and some fabrics can behave like liquids, where you've cut a 1/2 inch seam and you want your machine to sew it, and it's gonna, or velvets have a nap to them. When you put them opposing, because you have to make certain things match up, they do this thing where they go like that. They hate each other. They're like an opposite of a where a magnet detracts, and you can't line it up. So you have to where normally your fabric edge is like this, you're like, I know what you're gonna do, and so you have to put the one there, and then it goes zzz, to line it I gotcha. That can be really annoying. Chenilles, thank God they're going out of style because they were just awful. Like when you flip them upside down to sew them, there's no backing on them, and I have a walking foot on my machine, and my machine would just catch this one thread and catch this one thread and catch it, and it was just so chenilles, velvets, mohairs. I still hate chenilles. Velvets and mohairs, I figured out a method, but yeah, there's some that are just awful to work with, and the weird thing is you can't see some of them coming. You can't see some job. You think that oh, okay, I've been doing this for so long, I've seen everything. That we joke at my shop where we're like, I don't want to learn anymore. And they're constantly learning. You think you're learning a lesson that you can just be like, okay, I'll never. But then there's just another lesson, and so it's if we were a factory, it's so quickly you can learn the ins and outs and the do's and don'ts and what not to do and how that works and how that. But the custom thing is. It's annoying. It can be really annoying. There's no way to get a really good clip with anything. It's just there's constantly something that's going to surprise you. And, when I say the fabric is like skin, we have to estimate a job and send it away with somebody with a 50% deposit saying, this is what we expect this to be. And then a lot of times we'll get it in there and we'll be like, oh, crap. And then we eat it. So you try to get really good at just being able to have x-ray vision and just be like, okay, what are all the possible scenarios? And there's always something that's just not all the time. When I first started, it was every other job was like that, and now it's every 6th job is just so yeah. So I got a couple. I got my favorite tool, which is a seldom used tool, but I was going to kind of just show a little bit about what it does. So this is a channel stuffer. Okay, it always has two parts. And I don't get to use this very much, but when I do, it's just such an invaluable thing. And so these are channels that you might see on your grandmother's furniture, inside back of a chair that would come up and kind of go over. And you need the channels to be really uniform and stuff so that you're not seeing lumps. You can't just stuff down in there. And these come in all kinds of sizes. They were used in 50s stuff too, and you can get big ones or little ones, and these are the smallest ones. Hopefully I can demonstrate this for you. So you take the organic cotton, from Natural Felt, the local batting company, which is what this is, and you just kind of want to make long strips, but you're going to try to sort of confine it into the channel. And normally this would be stuffed with much more batting, but for the sake of not doing this for 10 minutes, I kind of am just loosely stuffing it. But so you do that, and then you fit it in your pre-sewn little thing here, and then you shove it in and pull it out. Way easier than trying to stuff in there. I got a couple weird tools from one of the defunct furniture manufacturers was Rose City Upholstery, not to be confused with the current Rose City Upholstery, but they were producing stuff along with Boatwell and Built-Right. And the old man, he was 95 years old, they had some kind of sale in there, and I don't even know how I heard about it, but I went there and I was in the basement. There was this 90-year-old guy, and he was the owner, and I think he was, I don't know, but it was sad. So I was picking up all these really just obscure things, and some stuff I didn't bring in, but I got this webbing stretcher, and it's always had a tooth missing, and it works just fine. But I went through like 3 of these that I got from the local supplier that have a plastic base, and they just fell apart. But I've had this one for like 10 years with its missing tine, and I got it from there. I love this. It has a leather base. And then the other thing that I got from them, which is, this is something that I use. It's almost like a milking stool, but I use this all the time. Upholsterers kind of need to have a stool available where they're just grabbing, because they've got to put something on this side and that side. And so I got this, and I didn't really know what it meant when it said sterilized tacks. And I learned that what that meant was you would take a magnetized hammer, and you would, I'm not going to actually do it, but you would fill your mouth with tacks, because you need to have 2 hands. So it was called spitting tacks, and they were sterilized because they're going in your mouth. And you'd put one on the magnetized end, and then you could stretch your fabric. You'd do it, and you'd spin it, and then nail it in.
Can you still do this?
No.
It's like a,
No, I've never done
like
it.
a cartoon thing or something.
No, it actually was done, but that was a way to keep your hand free, because how would you got a pile of tacks and it's magnetized. If you try to go with one, you're going to get them all sucked up, and then you can't do it. So, but if you have them in your mouth, you're controlling. I mean, I get why they did it, because you can't pull your fabric down, and then you got a nail, and then you got to hammer the nail. Like, it just doesn't work. You've got to be able to pull it
So
taut.
now you just use the pneumatic thing?
Yeah, so, ta-da! Yeah.
If they were flavored tacks, do you think that would?
I would definitely get a flavor tax. So if you can come up with it, I'll buy 1 box from you. But there was I read an
art.
article.
The window of your shop, man. People would like it.
Do you need a job? Do you wear like a Speedo?
Would be much better, right?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. But there was an article a couple years ago in like Architectural Digest or some magazine where this guy was an upholsterer he owned a shop in New York, and he was bragging about how his staff, and they had his staff off in the background, and they did not look like they were from this country originally, was spitting tacks, and they weren't using pneumatic stuff. And I was just like, F you, buddy, because I know what they're doing. I mean, they were spitting tacks, and he was having his, paying them next to nothing. And
it's kind of on sterile, though, even.
No, they're sterilized.
I know.
And now potentially flavored. So, no, but it was just kind of a weird thing that somebody would even think that would be appealing to whoever would use them. Just from having old upholstery.
When did they stop doing that?
Which do you want to know first? When did they stop doing it, or how did I figure it out? I figured it out. My uncle, our uncle, Buddy Lolcama, was an upholsterer, and
among other things.
That is not why I got into the trade. It had nothing to do with our half uncle that we met once. But so that was the story that I learned from him, was the spitting tacks, and it's just called spitting tacks. And they even call it spitting tacks even way after they stopped spitting tacks. It's just one of those things.
It's a saying, isn't it?
What's that?
I've heard that phrase.
Yeah, spinning tacks, and that's why with the sterilized thing. And I can tell you when they stopped using tacks, which I'm assuming that's directly when they stopped spitting tacks, because I don't know how, but they, this chair, this piece, sometimes the exact same piece from the exact same time period will have tacks on it, and sometimes it'll have staples. And so it's kind of interesting to see that, like, somebody be like, I don't use these crazy new things, and you can just tell that there's this, or sometimes pieces will have tacks and staples, but they're always in the 50s, early 60s, where they've kind of just started to do the transition.
So it'd be like
from,
maybe one worker still did it the old way, and the other worker's like, no, I don't do it that way.
Yeah, exactly. And like certain workers are responsible for certain parts of the chair. And so this piece, I was actually kind of surprised that it had staples. I'd never bothered to really look at until today.
What it had. So you'd say by the end of the 60s is when the spitting tacks.
Or tax in general, I can't say the spinning, but tax in general probably would be early 60s was when it went out. Spinning's popular, but yeah, so What else? What else do I have on my little?
Do you
list? I'm
only
forgetting.
use tacks now when it's decorative, you know, like on the outside, or do you ever?
We only use, and those are decorative tacks. They don't hold the fabric in place at all, and that's kind of waning. Just the style, really, like people that are redoing their home now are not really into the, you know.
Because
It's just they're just changing. Well, that's if it's ugly to you, it's ugly. I mean, it's they don't think it's ugly, but you know, we'll occasionally get people that are into really formal pieces, but really we're not doing. When I started doing 10 years ago, there was a ton more antique stuff, and you know, that's kind of waning. There's also something called a gimp. Do you know what gimp is? Where a piece of fabric would meet wood. And then it gets stapled, and then a raw edge gets cut off, like on an antique piece. You then have to cover that with either tacks or this kind of weird braided old lady thing. Bric-a-brac is kind of what you would maybe. And that stuff, I used to use that a ton when I was in trade school. And I don't even be like, dust it off, and what do we have? And it's just, so it's kind of changing. People are just getting way into like some more simpler pieces, and just a different generations buying that. You know, 10 years ago, there's a lot more 50s pieces being done. Now it's 60s pieces, and that is directly correlated with who's dying. I mean, I kind of figured that out. I'm like, okay, people from the 50s were dying. That was going into the hands of the thrift stores, the estate sales. And that's what people were buying. And now it just is going to keep, I mean, note that, you know, I mean, it just kind of follows a cycle of what's available, who dies, who. And so these people with these great homes, you know, that they had in the early 60s, they're all, unfortunately,
Leaving us people
leaving there like, I have this awesome chair.
Could you tell us a little more about the textile end of things, and maybe like the pros and cons of natural versus synthetic fibers, or
Sure.
how often you come across both and repairing?
Well, I offer both, and one would be a recycled polyester, and that's synthetic. And there's a lot of natural fibers that would be wools from Scandinavia or organic cottons that are produced here. Typically, the synthetic fibers tend to hold color better, be stronger, but they're not natural fibers. And the way our showroom works, we don't really dictate what we're selling. We have a medium of what we sell. It can't have Teflon on it. It can't have fire retardants on it. But beyond that, you know, some people cannot stand the idea of it being a synthetic fiber. They want to have organic cotton. They want it to be washable. They want it to be a slipcover. I would think the strength, the durability is better in synthetic. Color fastness is better. But is it better? It's kind of up to you. You know, I don't really judge what's better. I know it just depends on what your goal is. Is your goal to, you know, you can get $20 a yard organic cotton, and you can spend $150 a yard on a recycled polyester. So could you get your thing upholstered 10 times and keep it organic and save the money and not get the strength of the, you know, it's just, there's just a lot of ways to look at it. You know, wools are great because they're naturally stain resistant and durable and odor resistant. There's a lot of great colors and vegetable dyes, but there's no, you know, if I were to address like what do I want to work with versus what my philosophy is behind it, there's just, fabrics are all so different. You know, it's kind of it's not, I'm not trying to not answer your question, but it's kind of up to you to decide what's important to you. Some people have allergies and want to be like Julianne Moore in a safe house, and other people are just like, other people just don't want to kill it. You know, they don't want down because there's a duck in it, you know, involved or something. And just people have a lot of issues. So. And most people don't have a lot of issues, but we do get the occasional person that's just, you know, some people want us to kind of just decide for them and ask those kind of questions like, what are the advantages? And really, it's something for you to decide what you want if you're using our if you're going that route. You know, lots of upholstery places aren't involved in the eco-friendly thing at all. In fact, most places aren't. So you'd have to, you know, I think wear rating is really important. If you get something that's 5,000 Wiesenbeck double rubs versus 50,000, it's going to wear out. I mean, and so, but so that's eco, you know, so then you're making a wise choice about that. And then there's your own design, you know, when you start really looking into fabrics, like what do you like? What do you, there's just thousands and thousands.
Upholstery anything is eco-friendly because you're not throwing it away.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
What about hide? Do you have any restrictions on like hide, like for instance leather, or like cow leather, deer? Is there anything that you go there? Or
Well, personally, I don't. I eat meat, and I feel like using the hides are part of, you know, better part of, you're using the whole animal. There's a lot of heavy metal dyes in the hides, and so at our shop we use dyes that don't have any of those in there. You know, we've made exceptions with cow hides because there's very little done to them. They're not dyed, they're not, so we've had customers that have brought in cow hides with the fur still on it. We have products that are faux leather, that are PVC-free faux leather, that have a recycled leather component to them, like maybe 30% of the leather. The backing is made from post-industrial leather from large leather manufacturing. They grind that up. We use a lot of that. Leather, we found that leather is cost prohibitive to do on a custom piece for most people. You know, like I just did a custom built like bench seat. So it's 1 seat, 2 seat, and then 2 backs. And, you know, the leather alone was like $3,000. So that's out of most people's budget. And then, so then we could say, but look at this, there's this, and there's some really great products that are faux leather that we generally can convince people that are better. It's like it can cost you $300 instead of $3,000 or $700 instead of $3,000. But the leather's there, it's gorgeous, it's great. It was really great to be able to do that job. And you know, leather's always kind of scary because you can only sew it once. If you screw up, you can't really rip the seam out and sew it again. So it was like a little bit of a nail biter, but it did well. Yeah.
So you said you did full custom pieces too, right?
Yeah.
That include all the hard bits, the wood?
We design that. So in our shop, we're limited somewhat by its size and by what our backgrounds have been. And so we outsource the frames. And depending on what the project is, we have a frame builder that could build this. You could say, I want that. And he can build that frame. You could say, I like that couch from Pottery Barn, but I want an eco-friendly version of it with giant rolled arms. And we have another person that would do something more of an internal thing. And so we do outsource for that and any wood refinishing.
Just the manufacturing side of it?
Well, just the frame making. Once it comes into our shop as a bare frame with nothing on it, even for a fully upholstered piece. And then we build that up in our shop. So, and it can be, sometimes people bring in a picture, the drawn picture or photograph. It can really be anything. And, you know, one thing that working with somebody that just does frames, I know how to reupholster an existing frame. I've seen it all. But for me to have to go in the opposite direction and be like, how do you build it from scratch with all the tolerances and this and that? So I can draw a picture of it with fabric on it, with all the angles drawn in. And that frame builder can reduce that down to as like a skeleton and say like, well, by your inch here and your inch there, then you're off. And so what do we do? Because that's going to be too pitched back. But it's kind of great. And then we have someone that works for us that worked at a shop where he's just building frames up from scratch. And that's totally different than what we do, where we see what was already on there and we're following like a forensic thing. So we've kind of got the right people, picked people that know what they're doing to help us.
So
Yeah.
reverse engineering rather than.
Reverse engineering with the
Well, I'm just looking at the chair that you have here. I mean, upholstery aside, the wood pieces. I don't know anything about woodworking, but
yeah.
to make that, I mean, even if you envision it, how do you communicate that to someone that has the tooling to
You would just
turn
have
all
to,
the-
you could just do simple, you could do simple dimensions and they would correct your dimensions because they would say, well, you're off, they would know where you're off. He would, and my guy knows where I'm off when I do something that's slightly off pitched based, because I have to do like many different drawings, different perspectives like you would in engineering. And, but as far as this kind of stuff,
Yeah, you've got these, kind of smooth, tapered legs, and the bow.
this would be really rare in the custom world, but I think well,
Doesn't look easy to make.
no, but I imagine that somebody that does this night and day and that's all they're doing, it's probably very kind of simple joinery that all has to just come together to be flat on the ground. I don't know. I mean, I know how the upholstery, the wooden piece that fits in there makes perfect sense to me. This I don't. It might as well be that. That's the only thing that I ever see that bolts on in 2 pieces on there. So it's not really my expertise is the finished wood. So I can't really speak to. There's probably a couple people in this room that could. I know one for sure, but.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for attending, and why don't we have another round of applause for Erin? So our next meeting commences on March 8th at 6 p.m. with Katie Megan of M Space Book Arts Center. She's a letterpress printer, bookbinder, teacher, and artist living and working in Portland, Oregon. She teaches workshops regularly at both M Space Book Arts Center and the Independent Publishing Resource Center, also known as IPRC. She is the co-owner of Keegan, Megan & Company and a member, co-founder of M Space Book Arts Center. And she'll just discuss a brief history of letterpress, printing, and movable type and how it is evolving in contemporary applications. Everyone will have a hands-on experience printing their own piece of print ephemera on a tabletop platen press or poster press. This should be good. Thank you guys. Thanks, Erin.
Yeah, thank you. What?